It is.
Okay. We will begin the meeting at the Board of Directors of Calleguas, and let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, do we have any public?
Let's see. We do have some members of the public.
For public comments, this portion of the agenda may be utilized by any member of the public to address the Board of Directors in any matter within the jurisdiction of the board that does not appear on the agenda and on matters that are on the agenda but are not designated as action items. Depending on the subject matter, the Board of Directors may be unable to respond at this time or until the specific topic is placed on the agenda at a future Calleguas board meeting. In accordance with the Ralph M. Brown Act, please limit remarks to 3 minutes.
Any members of the public would like to comment at this time, please use the raise hand feature. There are no raised hands at this time.
Okay, then we will go on to presentation items.
New presentations tonight.
Items to be added to the agenda, government code.
No items to be added.
Okay, we have the consent calendar with 3 items and
Got a presentation on 5C we'd like to do before the board takes any action.
thank you.
All right, we've got a joint effort tonight between our manager of engineering. Oh, roll call. You're right. Thank you for
Oh my
keeping us on track.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Director Robert,
Present.
Director McMillan is absent, Director Vila,
Here.
Director Waters is absent, and Director Quady.
Here, and we just have a quorum. Thank you, Megan.
You're welcome.
Thank you for reminding us to do that. We were getting ahead of ourselves. So I was just so excited about the presentation that we have for you this evening, which is to provide some more background information about the action that the board is being asked to take on consent to approve professional services for condition assessment of pre-stressed concrete cylinder pipe. So we have Fernando Baez, our manager of engineering, Matt Gomez, our system maintenance supervisor, and Julio Reyes, our operations supervisor, who have teamed up on a presentation, provide some background and history on pre-stressed concrete cylinder pipe, on how we operate during shutdowns, and on what's involved in this testing process and what we do with the results. So turn over to Fernando.
Excellent. Good evening, Board of Directors. Thank you for that introduction, and I'll start off the presentation about condition assessment of PCCP, pre-stressed concrete cylinder pipeline. So I'll start off with explaining what is pre-stressed concrete cylinder pipe. It's not the typical one homogeneous material. PCCP is composed of a high-strength concrete core. It includes a high tensile pre-stressing wire and a very thin steel can. So the strength comes from the combination of the strength of the concrete and the pre-stressing wire that's under tension. And that entire system composes the PCCP pipeline material. So here, this photo, there it is. This is a photo showing the pre-stressing wire. It's typically thin wire gauge, and it's highly liquidly wounded around the concrete core, and then it's coated with mortar coating to protect it from corrosion. And this photo shows that pre-stressing wire, and then there's a gap that shows that thin steel can as well. So why do we do a condition assessment? Well, PCCP, unfortunately, is susceptible to catastrophic failures. The pre-stressing wires tend to corrode and fail. And one of the contributors to that is hydrogen embrittlement of the wires, and that is a common cause of failure in PCCP. So performing condition assessment helps us identify pipe sections with potential of structural deficiencies, and allows us to track and plan for rehab of those pipelines that may become structurally deficient. Sorry, skipped over. We unfortunately suffered a big event years ago where we had a catastrophic failure of one of our PCC pipelines. This is a video from March 30th, 1997 that I'd like to play for you all. Second here.
Simi Valley residents are back in their homes now after a ruptured water main forced them to evacuate, but repair crews continue to work around the clock to repair the damage.
That's Madera and Royal.
River
Yeah, from my house.
against Valley. It was just before 5 o'clock Saturday when a water main burst, forcing a flood of water to pour into the street.
My wife heard it. She said it sounded like a pop, like kind of like a loud light bulb going off. And she heard screaming from across the street.
Across the street is a shopping center, which was filled with people at the time the pipe burst. Suddenly, they were cut off by water gushing out at 20,000 gallons per minute. A half-mile stretch of Madera Road was quickly flooded, and with the water rapidly rising, nearby residents were told to evacuate.
Raging torrent. I mean, it was like raging.
Crews have been working nonstop to repair the damage. Now that the water has receded, you can get an idea of the immense force the water carried. Huge chunks of asphalt were ripped from the street and thrown to the sidewalk. Problem started a few days ago when a contractor working on the nearby Wood Ranch development cracked the water main. The valve under Madera Road was closed for repairs. A power outage on Saturday created a giant pressure surge. When the water hit that closed valve, it couldn't contain the pressure.
Some of that last part isn't entirely accurate, but that's okay.
But that video did show the pre-stressing wires and the steel can and a lot of concrete just everywhere. Unfortunately, again, PCCP tends to fail catastrophically, very different to the typical failure modes of welded steel pipe. That's why we like welded steel pipe much more. This next slide shows the amount of our system that's composed of PCCP. The lines shown in red and blue represent the Calleguas Conduit North Branch, and the lines in yellow and orange are our South Branch, 51-inch diameter, and our North Branch is 78 to 66-inch diameter. There's also a purple line there representing the Terra Rajada feeder, and collectively that is a total of 26 miles of pipeline that we have in our system. So how is condition assessment performed? Well, it requires the pipeline to be taken out of service. As I'm not sure if you can recognize, we do have one of our staff members in pipe there. So we have to take the pipeline out of service. We have to isolate it and dewater it, obviously. And we insert the inspection tool that does the inspection looking for wire breaks specifically. So here's a photo showing that instrument. It's evolved over the years. And basically what this tool does, it produces an electric field that creates an electric current in the pre-stressing wire. The second coil detects the electric field produced by the wires, and a break in the wire creates a disruption. That's how we know that there's a break, because we identify and detect that interruption in that field. So shutting down Calleguas Conduit, let's talk about what happens actually during that actual inspection. Of course, it requires all hands on deck. O&M engineering is certainly involved in this. Our operations and system maintenance requires extensive coordination ahead of the shutdown and the entry into the pipeline. And we also coordinate very closely with Metropolitan Water District's shutdowns, so we can take advantage of that period when we're not going to get imported water supplies into our system. And with that, I'll hand it over to Julio. Thanks for the next steps.
Before I get started, about 2 weeks ago, Ian sent an email to all the supervisors with a list of bulleted item questions. One of them was, what keeps you and your staff awake at night? And I think I can say now, line breaks keep me awake at night. So let's talk about how does the operations division prepare for Lake Bird water filtration plant and Las Posas wellfield production? Where's page down? Oh, here it is. Thank you. Oh, okay. Okay. So we're going to start with Lake Bard Water Filtration Plant. We have to go all the way to the source, which is Lake Bard. At the source, we need to determine what the water quality is. I've got about 3 or 4 items here that are very particular that we need to know about in the operations division to understand what would optimize performance at the treatment plant. One of them is oxygen. We need to know whether or not the water is anoxic, which is low in oxygen, because this could cause water to smell like hydrogen sulfide, which smells like rotten eggs. And if you have hot water heater, some of you may have opened up that drain and it has that foul smell. That's hydrogen sulfide. That's the rotten egg smell, which is obviously undesirable. Other things that we look at are elevated algae concentrations. We need to determine whether or not the amount of algae that occurs naturally in the lake is elevated. If it's elevated, then it's going to affect the filter performance because the algae at the surface of the filters. And so the filters are designed for the particulate matter to penetrate into the filter box. And so if they're matted on the surface, it's reducing the runtime and the effectiveness of the. Also, turbidity is very important. Turbidity is the cloudiness of the water. This is the amount of suspended particles in the water column. This is important because elevated turbidity would mean that we would have to increase the coagulant dose to neutralize that turbidity. Conversely, if the turbidity levels are low, we would adjust it downward accordingly. And lastly is temperature and pH. That's very important in chlorine disinfection because depending on where you are with pH, if the pH is a little bit high, it reduces the effectiveness of the chlorine disinfection. Okay. These 2 images here are basically from an email sent to me from Amy Mueller, the regulatory compliance supervisor. And on the left image there, you can see a graph. And the graph has on the vertical axis, the oxygen concentration. And on the horizontal axis, it's the lake level. And you can see at the height of the lake, the oxygen concentration is about 8 milligrams per liter. So you travel down from valve 1, valve 2, and you'll notice that the oxygen concentration drops dramatically, transitioning from valve 2 to valve 3. It goes all the way down to 0. So this is a total indication that the lake is thermally stratified. So we have the ability to draw from those valves. So that information is very helpful to us to let us know that where the valves have 0 oxygen, it could be a challenge to treat that water. On the right-hand side there, you can see we have valves 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we have a table here where let's jump all the way to dissolved oxygen. You could see at the higher levels, valve 1 is at 8.4, valve 2 is at 6.35, but it drops dramatically at valves 3 and 4. So this is very good information to help us understand what the water quality is at the lake before we start a Lake Bard water filtration plant. Okay, so once we understand what's going on with the water quality at Lake Bard, we then put the Lake Bard water filtration plant in the recirculation mode. So lake water is then recirculated through the filtration plant and back to Lake Bard to displace any water that has been sitting within the treatment plant system. During recirculation mode, ancillary equipment is exercised and tested to ensure that it's reliable during production. To the left there is one of our operators, Rafael Medina. He's overseeing a filter backwash. You can notice that the water is flowing out of the green troughs and into the gullet there. This is when we're washing it, the flow basically travels backwards. On the right side there is Casey Versieg. He's overseeing a filter in slipstream mode, which is just another term for bypass. The bypass mode, the slipstream mode, is the mode that we're using when we're in recirculation mode. Operations could not do this alone. We most definitely need the support from the other O&M groups. Juan Zavalza is with the distribution system group, and he's replacing a diaphragm valve on the solenoid. A diaphragm on the solenoid. This solenoid valve receives cooling water, and that cooling water is injected into the sludge pump there. And to the right, we have Patrick Augusta. He's working on a positive displacement pump for one of our filtrate systems. The filtrate chemical helps improve the coagulant dose, so that's really important. Okay. After chemical doses have been adjusted and filters have been backwashed and preconditioned and performance tested, and plant performance is all dialed in, treated water is redirected from the recirculation mode into the clear wells and then into the distribution system. Off to the right there, we have two operators, Eddie Russell and David Hernandez. They're opening up those clear well valves and preparing for a backwash supply. The clear well is basically right on the other side of Eddie Russell there. And so the water flow during backwash is from the clear wells through these valves, which are isolated closed. They're going to open them up that pipe to a backwash pump and into the filters. This is a graphical overview of a text overview of the Lakeport Water Filtration Plant. And what I'm looking at as we're transitioning from recirculation mode into production mode is this screen right here, in particular turbidity. So turbidity values need to be low enough. And also the chlorine residual needs to be in the adequate range before we open up those 60-inch clear well valves and redirect water from the recirculation mode into production mode as the water goes into the clear wells. Okay, on to the Las Posas well field. Water extracted from the wells at well field 1 and 2 can be high in iron and manganese. Therefore, pre-injected MWD water pushes a plume of high-quality water that reduces the amount of iron and manganese that can be oxidized by chlorine and precipitate into the water, causing undesirable color during extraction. Also, injection helps reduce the chlorine demand during disinfection. So we need to make sure that we bank enough MWD water into the ground to last for the duration of the outage. Something that we need to be considerate of when we do so is most wells, when we're injecting, only inject at a rate of 1.5 CFS cubic feet per second. Yet during extraction, they produce at a rate of 3 CFS. So it takes longer to inject water into the, at the same quantity than it takes to turn around and extract it. The longer we extract, the likelier the iron and manganese concentrations are to increase. And so that's why it's really important in operations to make sure that we bank enough water before we turn around and extract it. This is Jose Tamayo. He's configuring on the local control panel well 7 for flush. And here he is again to the right, just taking a look at into the air gap here, just taking a look at the color. And that's it. I'm going to hand it off to Matt.
All right. With that, pipeline entries keep me up at night. You'll see why. So for system maintenance purposes, and particularly for this pipeline entry that we have coming up next week or next year, sorry, we do confined space training at a rescue facility at wellfield number 1 before all shutdowns. And so that's the picture to the left. And then to the right, that's Pepe. Savant is actually entering the 78-inch last time we did this pipeline inspection. So as you can see to the right, North Branch Unit 1, it starts at West Portal and then it goes to Donkey Hill, which is Yosemite and Catherine. So that would be from one line valve to another. Doesn't look like it, but that's about 2.3 miles worth of 78-inch pipeline.
Donkey Hill is an important geographic place name in Calleguas, but it has no official standing elsewhere. Apparently, someone once saw a donkey on the hill. Has therefore been known since as Donkey Hill. It's a big landmark for us, but if you go tell your friends you're going to Donkey Hill, they will have no idea what you're talking about.
We could city to make that official.
We certainly could. That'd be great. You know how excited people would be here.
It's super hard to explain to the new guys why we call it Donkey Hill. But our preparation for this particular shutdown will be about 4 months. We coordinate with all Calleguas O&M divisions, engineering department, pipeline inspector, contractor. We touch base with the impacted purveyors, and we have to submit traffic control to the cities. Some other critical tasks is to develop a shutdown sequence. We check stock of sodium thiosulfate, which is used for dechlorination purposes. Check all manhole gaskets and bolt stock because we switch those out every time we take them off. And then we have rental equipment. I mean, as little as a restroom if necessary for the shutdowns. So here's an example of the shutdown sequence. It's kind of hard to see, but there's 181 steps on that. So that's from start to finish, starting with the traffic control and stock and ending with our back T samples. So this is probably one of our smaller shutdowns. So the bigger shutdowns have at least 300 tasks to take care of.
There's a lot of fast reading.
So we start out with isolation. So isolation could be from anywhere from 2 to main feeder valves. We prefer to double isolate as a safety precaution when we can. And operations, which is the Calleguas control room, must be called before we touch any isolation valve to open or close it. So the picture to the left is David Vaca. He's isolating a 24-inch interconnect valve. And then the middle picture is Hector Aguilera isolating the 78-inch valve near West Portal. So Hector is actually standing on the 8-inch pipe on the far right picture to reach that valve. So that takes about 30 to 35 minutes to close, and that's going nice and slow. And that's just one of the valves. So one of the valves takes 30 to 35 minutes to close. And then once we isolate our valves, we start the dewatering process. In the upper left-hand corner, that's an 8-inch plug valve. And that's what we use to mainly dewater the pipelines for shutdowns. This particular shutdown, we have 4 blow-offs that we're going to be using to dewater. Total gallons for this is 3.1 million gallons. It'll probably take us about 3 days to dewater this whole pipeline. Certain sections are connected to storm drains, and certain sections we have to run temporary piping just to get the water away from the job site. So it could be from anywhere to 40 to 60 feet of temporary piping. And we try to go to V ditches, or we have to let it go down the road to the nearest storm drain. The bottom left-hand corner next to the orange bucket is sodium sulfate. We set that up as a drip system and it dechlorinates the water. After dewatering using blow-offs, we have to start pumping. So there's various sections throughout the pipeline where we need to start pumping. As you can see, Jose Tito Ramos in the left-hand corner, we're sending down 4-inch suction hoses down a manhole into the main feeder pipeline to extract the bellies that were left. And then Jaime Magdaleno in the middle, that's actually by Baja Fresh where we had the catastrophic failure. So that's a newer section of pipeline, but there's a huge belly right there that takes time to pump out. And then David Vaca on the far right, he's calculating how many inches we have dropped in 30 minutes. So we usually keep time and track of how many inches we're dropping within 30 minutes to 45 minutes just to kind of tell how much progress we're making. And then once we get those bellies out from the pump wells and manholes, we can start taking off the rest of the manholes. So most of them, these manholes are usually pressurized, so we can't take them off till we depressurize the line. So those are 20-inch manholes. They usually have 20 bolts, and those are the manhole gaskets and bolts that we replace each and every time. So to the far left, we're using an impact gun to extract those bolts. The middle picture is what the manhole usually looks like during high pressure. And the far right picture is Ivan Guzman actually taking off the manhole for entry to the pipeline. Then once we get all those manholes off, and in this certain section, we have 12 manholes that we're going to be taking off. We set up ventilation. So the picture to the right, the fan is exhausting, and the picture to the left is the fan blowing in. So we always walk into the wind, and as soon as we pass the section, we switch the fans, so exhaust is always behind you. We found out in previous inspections that it's always best to walk into the wind instead of exhausting and walking in. As we have contractors working above ground or even vehicles passing in Simi Valley at traffic stops where their exhaust is just being into the fan. So they're at a stoplight, the exhaust is going straight into the fan, and all we're doing is pumping into that. So we found it's best to always walk towards so we can exhaust it quickly. So then we do a pipeline pre-inspection. So as you guys know, plans aren't always perfect. So there is bellies that we can't get to from the manholes or the pump wells. So during our pre-inspection, we've come up to at least 2 feet of water, about 300 feet long, where we have to get the water out. The only way we can get the water out is to physically go in the pipe, drag pumps down into as far as we can get into that belly. So sometimes we run 2-inch submersible pumps or 4-inch. And then we run the hoses 200-300 feet to the nearest manhole, and then we extract it above grade. So those take some time, and we always run into those during each pipeline inspection. And that's why we do pre-inspection. Then once we get all those bellies out, then we can actually start the pipeline inspection. So our main purpose is to provide support to the contractors. So we help them lower their equipment, we help them set up their equipment, and then we actually do a visual pipeline inspection ourselves. So to the left, that's the contractor getting into the manhole. The picture in the middle is actually Xylem setting up their equipment in the 78-inch. And then to the right is Pepe and Jared at Erringer line valve. So Pepe is doing a visual inspection on the access manhole. And then right in front of Pepe is Erringer line valve that is fully pressurized on the other side. So as you can see, there's no leakage on that one, so we feel comfortable just doing single isolation on that side. So after the inspection, the contractor is completed, we get to go back and work in reverse. So we install all manholes, we close all blow-offs, we install pump well big caps, which is part of the blow-offs. And then we assign staff to air and vacuum valves to monitor air while we recharge. And then we can begin recharging. The middle picture is a 10-inch air and vacuum valve. And then Andres Andrade, one of our newer employees, is actually monitoring the air vac while we do the recharge. So we're monitoring for air. Air's our friend. We don't want too much, we don't want too little. We're always just putting our hand over the flow and then just monitoring. If it's going too drastic, we shut down the valve a little bit. But air is our friend. Air could be our enemy. So a way to recharge, picture to the left is what we call a bypass or a high line, where we pull water from an air vac, which would be the upstream side, and it goes into a meter, and we put it back into the pipeline through an 8-inch blow off. Sometimes the valves, which you can see in the middle, are super hard to operate. So sometimes there's high pressure on one side, no pressure on the other. So we have to kind of divert water around the line valve to equalize that pressure. And then to the right, there's another picture of an air vac. And then we have a pressure gauge off the 1-inch ball valve. And then we monitor pressure to know how far we've come. So as soon as we start gaining pressure, we can start monitoring where we're at. So that's a picture of an air vac with the pressure gauge. We also do manholes with pressure gauges, and we do blow-offs with pressure gauges also, because we're running blind during recharges if we don't have a meter like we do on the left. So sometimes we're just going by sound and feel. So we've got to try to find anything we can use to monitor the recharge. And we got 3.1 million gallons to recharge, so it's going to be quite some time. So it'll probably take us about 2 days to recharge, and that's running 24-hour shifts. So we'll go day and night, probably running about 2,000 gallons per minute. And we'll just have separate shifts, and we'll just be running everything and monitoring everything to make sure we're not spilling anywhere. Make sure all manholes were put back on properly, all blow-offs were closed, all pump well caps were put back on. And then once we get it fully charged, we do a back T sample. So Maya Rostrada is prepping for the back T sample. We usually take them off air vacs. And then Sean Miller is actually collecting the back T samples. They have a 24-hour incubator waiting period. So after we get the line fully recharged, we flush for the back T, they take the back T sample, and we have to wait 24 hours until we could put the line back into service. So that's a whole nother day that we have to wait during the process. And that's Sean Crane saying that's a wrap. That's the final steps after the 24-hour waiting period. Operations and system maintenance staff coordinates to unisolate all valves. Then resume normal operation of the distribution system, and then we can notify all impacted purveyors and that they can resume normal operation. So yeah, this particular shutdown 78-inch pipeline, 2.3 miles or 12,500 feet, which is roughly about 3.1 million gallons. So 2 weeks worth of work, hopefully 1 day worth of inspection by the contractor. And we run 24 hours for recharge. We'll hand it back to you.
Do you get a lot of phone calls on the discharge evacuated?
Yes, we do. Yes. We actually started labeling all our sodium thiosulfate jugs with Calleguas MWD. We're putting our phone number to the control room. So, thanks. Yes, we do.
Okay, so once Matt's group system maintenance is completely done, everything's back to normal operations. We waited on 24 hours on the back T. We can now transition off the Calleguas local resources, which are Lake Forest Water Filtration Plant and the Las Posas well field, back onto metropolitan water deliveries. To the left here is a shot of Granson Pump Station. Granson Pump Station draws water from the Las Posas well field. To the right is the Canal Pump Station. Canal Pump Station draws water from Lake Forest Water Filtration Plant. Both of these facilities are pretty much in the middle of the distribution system. However, we import water from MWD on the east end of the distribution system. That is why we need these pumps, because the hydraulic gradient drops as you travel westward. So this is a graphical image of the Calleguas distribution system. The arrows that are green represent water that's coming from the well field, and the arrows that are blue represent water that's coming from Lake Forest Water Filtration Plant. In this example here, that X to the far right means that we have a zero flow event. However, we could have a zero flow event or a restricted flow event going on. And the way we transition onto MWD off of the Calleguas local resources is we'll start by taking a look at pressures on the east end of the distribution system. And we have two standpipes, which we call the west portal. One is connected to the north conduit and the other is connected to the south conduit. We're coordinating with Eagle Rock, which is the MWD operations center. And for example, I'll either go 20 CFS or 10 CFS increments. So they will start delivering that water to us. And I'm looking for indications that we've received the water, that's come down the tunnel and that's at the base of the tunnel into the distribution system. And the pressure gauges that we have on that side of the distribution system, as well as those portals. As the portal levels are going up, that's telling me that we have the water. So then I will decrease either from the Las Posas well field or the Lake Forest Water Filtration Plant at the same increment. And I'll just keep on repeating cycle until all of the local resources at Calleguas are at zero. And all of the deliveries are now coming in from MWD, which is back to normal operations. So this is what it looks like now. Water's not going in every direction. It's traveling east to west, as depicted by those dark blue arrows there. And now we're back to normal operations. It's pretty much pretty.
So what happens after the inspection is done, right? There's a lot of work that goes into planning and implementing the actual inspection. And then we wait for the consultant to submit the report on their findings. And this table here that I'm showing here is a summary of the wire break information that may be submitted as part of that report. All those red dots indicate where a stress pipe was identified, a wire break was identified in this example. And there's also indications where we have restrained joints. That's also detected by the tool. But those distress locations are what we need to identify and keep an eye on. In addition to that distress number of pipes that we are made aware of, we also are now planning to receive performance curves. These performance curves are basically structural analysis of the pipe sections, basically graphing out the strength of the pipeline. And the graph on the left here, that top curve, shows the strength of the pipe. And right below that is this green looking curve. That's the yield strength. That's what happens when the pipeline exceeds the yield strength. It means it's no longer it may deform if it's underneath the yield strength, and then return to normal formation. And by deform, I'm talking about increments of a fraction of an inch that the pipe may deflect. If the yield strength of that pipe is exceeded, the pipeline will not go back to its normal form and it's losing strength. So that is that line that we're keeping an eye on. The graph on the right shows the various analysis of each stick of pipe along a 2, 3, 4, 5 mile pipeline segment. And as you can see in this example, there are orange dots representing wire breaks, but that's below the yield strength of the pipeline segment. Those 3 green looking dots are wire breaks or pipeline sections that have wire breaks that have exceeded the yield strength of the pipe. So those would be locations that we would implement a rehab of the pipeline before we get to the point where critical failure may happen because we're exceeding the strength of the overall pipeline. So this is the type of information we would be receiving as part of that report to help us determine what are those next steps. So what do we do with that information? Depending on the number of wire breaks, if the pipeline is not at risk of failure, we continue to monitor that pipeline, and the frequency is to inspect each stick of pipe every 5 years. So we would come back to this same segment 5 years from now and determine to see if we have more wire breaks or the same number of wire breaks. And again, if we are approaching that yield strength, then that's where we would come back to the board and ask for capital project budget to implement a rehab project of that pipeline section. So what are the options to rehabilitate the pipeline? Carbon fiber liner reinforcement is one option. That's what this photo shows here. Carbon fiber can be used to line the inside of the pipeline and create a new pipe that does not rely on the hose pipe, and it would operate at normal operations without having the risk of failure. We have also implemented steel liners, which are a bit more invasive. It requires excavation, whereas CFRP requires just an access manhole. Somebody can walk in with those carbon fiber rolls and basically apply them to the inside of the pipeline. And then the last resort would be direct replacement of those fixed pipes. So what's next? We'll continue to perform annual inspections to monitor those wire breaks in our PCCP pipeline and perform rehabilitation as needed. And that concludes our presentation tonight, and we're happy to take questions.
I did have one about the carbon fiber repair. So with the pre-stressed concrete, it seems we have a decent ability to analyze point defects and how they correlate to the strength. With the up-armored carbon fiber ones, does that affect our ability to inspect and gauge strength?
So once we rehab a pipe section with carbon fiber, we're no longer relying on the hose pipe. So that section of PCCP that's been rehabbed no longer is of concern of how many wire breaks it has, because that carbon fiber lining is structurally independent and does not depend on the structural capacity of the hose pipe. So it would not matter to us.
Right. And so the carbon fiber though, how do we inspect that?
Oh, great question. So carbon fiber, we're not looking for wire breaks. That is just a visual inspection to see if there's any delamination.
So you can see it.
You can walk in and see, yes. I don't have a photo of how it looks, but you can actually see the resin.
We've gone in and seen them 20 years after they went in. They look like they were installed yesterday.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing, actually, how well they persist.
Cool.
Thank you.
So, and speaking of, is there a time component of, given the frequency that you take a look at this, you do it every 5 years, but then you also do some pipe break assessments annually, huh? And then.
The performance curves?
Yeah, so how would you derive a
So the performance curves are actually something we're just doing for the first time. We had not done the performance curves. So the plan is to have the consultant also do the structural analysis of each segment. And now we're going to get a clear picture of how many wire breaks we have in a segment of pipe and how that compares to the yield strength of the pipeline. If we have some that are identified to be close to the yield, we may want to come back in 2 years rather than 5 years. So that's something that's going to serve us to inform how often we need to come back to a certain section.
But there's nothing that we can say that the rate of change is this.
We have not seen that historically, if there's a constant rate or curve on wire breaks. So soils aren't changing.
That's not a valuable pattern.
It's not.
Telling me, yes.
Eventually, over time, though, it will continue to break and we'll continue to patch. Over time, eventually we'll have a full carbon fiber lined.
Carbon fiber, steel liner, or direct replacement.
We still have only had to strengthen small sections mostly. And the last time we did a carbon fiber was 5 years ago, more.
2016.
Okay.
Oh, wow. So 8 years ago.
2016.
So I will say we've been off our inspection cycle a little bit. That was a combination of COVID and other shutdowns. So we're getting back on track on that, but we have not seen rapid deterioration over time.
What's the cost of one of those carbon fiber patches?
A lot.
Get the linear foot cost. It's one of the most costlier of the three alternatives.
Really?
Yes. Well, the good news is the technology was patented and the patent expired about 5 years ago. So there are other manufacturers making that type of carbon fiber system, or we're hoping the cost will come down.
Okay.
But it is less invasive as
Downtime rate.
less downtime.
No need to excavate.
No need to excavate, right?
Total replacement would be worse, right?
Yes.
Yes.
And yes.
Wow. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good.
That was a great presentation.
Very good. Okay, so that was item 5C, and we have the consent calendar. Any discussion? Comments on the minutes for the Eagle Aerial Solutions?
I'll make
Your technology.
the motion to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
Motion's been first and seconded. Roll call vote.
Director Robert,
Yes.
Director McMillan,
Yes, and I would like to acknowledge my presence.
Director Avila,
Aye.
Director Waters is absent, and Director Queen.
Aye. Consent calendar carries. Okay, action items. We have a discussion regarding the consideration of board position on Proposition 4.
Yes, Charlotte Holofield, our manager of external affairs, will be presenting this item.
ENC.
It was all part of consent.
Oh, okay, so we just did it all. All right,
Sure.
We only had one that had a presentation.
okay. Great, here we are. Good evening, President Quady, board members, staff, and guests. Tonight, I'm going to be talking with you about Proposition 4, the Safe Drinking Water, Wildfire Prevention, Drought Preparedness, and Clean Air Bond Act of 2024. A bit of background for you. It stems from Senate Bill 867 by Senator Allen. Identical language and title. That bill was introduced back in February of 2023 after a year and a half of different bond measures being decided and debated in the state legislature. It was placed on the November ballot by the state legislature and the governor on July 3rd as SB 867. And it is a $10 billion bond with 8 categories of funding. And overall, its goal is to provide a comprehensive and fiscally responsible approach for addressing the varied challenges facing California's current and future climate impacts. So tonight I'll be reviewing the provisions primarily in the water segment of the bond, and then discussing some of the supporters and opponents, as well as some of the fiscal aspects to it, and then turning it over to your board to see if you'd like to position on this measure. So we have been involved with SB 867 pretty much from when it was introduced. We drafted and signed on to numerous individual and coalition letters to legislators and committees. Our involvement aligns with our legislative policy principles that your board adopted in December of last year to support opportunities that allow the district to compete for its fair share of regional, state, and federal funding, including grants and other funding programs. So yes, some advocacy did precede the adoption of those legislative policy principles in December, but it's right in line with what your board adopted at that time. So for the water funding category, I'm going to apologize ahead of time. I don't normally like to have all this text on a slide, but I felt it was important to really get into the weeds on this particular aspect, since this is of the primary concern to Calleguas, and I think your discussion tonight. So of the 10 billion, 3.8 billion is allocated for safe drinking water, drought, flood, and water resilience. What does that mean? So let's get into some of the weeds here. So 1.85 billion is to protect and increase California's water supply and water quality. This includes almost 400 million for water reuse and recycling, all of the components thereof, treatment, storage, conveyance, distribution, 75 million for regional conveyance projects, 62.5 million for brackish water desal projects and salinity management projects, $600+ million for safe drinking water and clean water provisions. These include things like water quality monitoring, specifically in regard to PFAS and Chrome-6, remediation for those chemicals as well. What the bond notes as innovative projects to increase affordability of safe drinking water, tribal water projects, and groundwater contamination. Those are all under that 610. Second slide is for groundwater management programs, $586 million for storage, banking, recharge, and compliance with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. There is $100 million allocated for regional watershed resilience, 75 million for water conservation in agricultural and urban areas, about $500 million for dam safety, 150 million for delta levees to increase flood protection and improve climate resilience, and 700+ million for protecting and restoring rivers, lakes, streams, integrated regional water management, and improving climate resilience in watersheds. So those are the highlights of the water related categories. So I just want to review for you the 7 other categories that are in this bond. One, the second highest funded is wildfire and forest resilience at $1.5 billion. And I just pulled out 2 bullet points in that particular category because I thought they would be of interest to you because they deal with water related issues. One is for watershed restoration and improvement. There's money in that particular category for that. And then hardening of critical community infrastructure, and those do include water facilities. So if this bond were to pass and your board were interested in supporting it, just reverse those 2 things, we might be recipients of some of that in that particular category if we were successful in that application. And then also in the bond are coastal resilience funds, extreme heat mitigation funds, $500 million, protecting biodiversity, accelerating nature-based climate solutions, farms, ranches, and working lands, $300 million, money for parks creation, money for clean air, and that is about half of that allocated for offshore wind development. I can go into a little bit more of each of these if you want me to, but I'm gonna kind of move ahead and we can come back if needed. So it's noteworthy in this bond that 40% of the funding must go to vulnerable populations or disadvantaged communities. What does that mean? So vulnerable populations are a subgroup of a population within a region or community that face a disproportionately heightened risk or increased sensitivity to impacts of climate change and lack adequate resources to cope with those. And a disadvantaged community is the existing definition in statute. It means a community with a median household income of 80% or less of the area average. And of that 40% that must go to these 2 populations or subgroups, 10% must go to severely disadvantaged communities. And that is defined as a community with a median household income of less than 60% of area average. So a full 40% of the bond funds must go to these special populations. It's worth noting. And administrative expenses are capped at 7% of any allocation received under the bond or $20 million, whichever is lower. So moving into a partial list of supporters and opponents, I wanted to point out for you in particular some of the water suppliers that have come out in support of the measure, and they include Metropolitan, Las Virgenes, San Diego, West Basin, Coachella Valley, Irvine Ranch, Foothill, East Bay Mud, Upper San Gabriel, and West Basin. This is not a comprehensive list of all of the organizations that support the bond, but just again, pulling out those water-related ones. Opponents include the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, Senate Minority Leader Brian Jones, Assemblymember Jim Patterson. And their arguments are in the ballot pamphlet that you hopefully received at your homes. And I did want to spend a bit of time talking about ACWA, the Association of California Water Agencies. ACWA was very active in this measure for many, many months. They were very active in trying to get a bond measure on the ballot. Their goal ultimately was to have 2/3 of the bond fund water-related projects. So they felt it fell short at just under 40% allocated for water-related projects. They did coordinate a very sophisticated campaign in the last months leading up to the bond passing the legislature of floor alerts and letters to legislators and coalition letters. And we did sign on to those. We were happy to try to push for that 2/3 to be water-related projects. It was not successful. And again, ACWA decided to take a neutral position because their concern was the amount allocated was just insufficient to address climate change in a meaningful way. So just wanted to note that. And then, of course, bonds aren't free money. They must be paid back with interest. So I pulled for you the Legislative Analyst Office analysis. And as a reminder, the LAO is the legislature's nonpartisan fiscal policy advisor. They've been around for 75 years. Primarily, they analyze the state budget every year. And they're sort of the eyes and ears of the legislature to make sure the legislature's policies are being executed in a fiscally responsible and effective manner. So it's not unusual for them to weigh in on analyzing ballot measures. So they did that with this. As you can see to the left, their cost estimate is that the amount borrowed, as we said, is $10 billion. The average repayment cost would be $400 million per year over 40 years. And the source of repayment is general tax revenue. They expanded their analysis to note that the additional state funding, should this pass, could replace local government money that would otherwise be needed to pay for a project. In addition, they said really on net, Prop 4 likely would result in savings to local governments and potential state and local savings if funded projects prevented disasters that require response and recovery. So for example, some of the fire-related measures in there, if they were to be effective, they could mitigate sort of the effects if there were a disaster, if there had not been those measures taken in the first place as a result of this bond funding. So those are the highlights of their fiscal analysis. And thinking about the potential benefit to Calleguas and our region, the bond priorities do align with any or some of our risk projects in discussion. We do have a long history of successfully securing bond funding, thanks in large part to our general manager for both the district and the region. There are some examples of the 5 other ballot initiatives from which we've been able to draw funding successfully. And if passed, this initiative could present another opportunity to go for grant funding for projects that are beneficial to Calleguas and or the region. Okay, so moving into some nuts and bolts a little bit on your board engaging in ballot measure advocacy. And advocacy is really a misnomer because you really can't do much. The California Special Districts Association has issued guidance, and really the allowable activity that would be of your primary focus is adopting a formal position in support or in opposition to a ballot measure in an open meeting of the special district, which of course this is. You can educate, I should say, the district could educate the public on the measure, its impacts on the district, and why your board took the position that it did, should you choose to engage in taking a position. And lastly, as a district, we could explain that position if your board were to take one without being obligated to explain all sides of the issue. So those are sort of the allowable activities. I'm sure Walt will pipe in if I missed anything or got anything wrong. And then-
I won't do that, but I'll say I checked it and it's all right.
Okay.
How's that?
Excellent, even better. So the main prohibited activities, we can't use public funds to support or oppose a ballot measures campaign. Kind of the rule of thumb, information, not advocacy, and explanation, not promotion. So if your board were to take that position, these are kind of the limitations that we need to act under as staff. And speaking of a board position, your options tonight are pretty straightforward, whether to support, opposed, take a formal neutral position, not engage at all. But I hope this overview has helped inform you as to the measure itself and how it may be beneficial, how others feel about it. So happy to take any questions.
Okay, we'll open up the discussion. Anybody want to be first?
I'll go first. I agree with Aqua's position. It's not a whole lot of money going directly to water. And once you get it to the water portion, it's really not all beneficial to our district. Yes, part of it is, but the impact on our ratepayers that are already paying so much money in taxes and fees and water rates is incredibly high. The only thing I would possibly support is informing the public on the pros and cons. Not officially taking a position, but letting them know basically what you told us here. Here's where it would go. Here's the pros, here's the cons. That's where I'm at.
Legislative analyst office provide any cost benefit analysis? That's what how it was.
Not that I saw, Director McMillan.
Okay.
I did notice that it said that we weren't obligated to explain both sides, but I would personally be for explaining equally both sides to properly educate people to be able to make their own decisions. If we decided to put forth any sort of education.
I can go either way.
Well, for me, I concur with all the advantages that it does offer. Hope in terms of Calleguas's stance, but going forward, I kind of think of this in terms of the statewide context. That this proposition to me represents a proposition with costs to avoid future higher costs. So I see it in a statewide application without intervention. The cost of climate impacts is estimated at 114 trillion annually by 2050. I'm just bringing stuff out of the information that you get in the FEMA estimates every $1 spent on resiliency saves $6 in disaster relief. So if you have a $10 billion investment, you can avoid 60 trillion disaster relief. As the presentation here started out with, is that there are 1 million Californians that lack easy access to safe, affordable, and clean drinking water. And as much as there's not a lot of money for drinking water in context to Aqua, I see crossover advantages. One of my big concerns is about forest management and the severe fires that we've had obvious in our recent history. That forest management needs some attention to take care of the watersheds. And I do understand that there are places in California that don't care much about forests because they don't have any, but in the statewide context is where I would come from. So I think that the climate change related events require a statewide investment to increase climate resilience of communities and natural systems. I think the planning, investment, and action to address current and future climate change impacts must be guided by the best available science locally and globally. So I would see this not in terms of what it can do for major impact on water infrastructure, but I do see this as a step forward. And in my view, it's something I would support. The state budget is at 4.7 billion. And so to put in context of what the trillions of disaster response would be, the 400 million on a $10 billion bond over 40 years doesn't sound like it's going to really damage people inordinately. So I would be in a position to request that we support it. But that can be assumed that all information that we have about it can be shared to the public and giving both sides. I don't see any problem with that at all.
I did pull up the legislative analysis review of this proposition. And it said, you know, our current state bond debt is at $80 billion. And it would double the long-term cost to taxpayers, estimated 20 billion. It would divert funding from other essential state programs and services. Of course, that's more on the opponent side. But the actual cost would be about 400 million annually for 40 years, adding to the state's estimated bond debt, which of course would happen. And that's about it.
And I would agree with what you said, Scott, if the state had a good record of properly appropriating the funds, which unfortunately isn't always the case. That's why I'm not gonna personally support or oppose, just neutral.
I would also add that, you know, disaster relief and prevention and I'd say disaster hardening in other areas other than water still could benefit water in the sense that if there's a water emergency and there's no funding because other emergencies have taken up that funding, you know, hardening the state as a whole is a benefit to the water community in general.
And I will just add that the prevention of wildfires does have direct benefits.
Absolutely.
In watersheds.
Sure.
That does impact our systems. So it's not just purely what's aimed at water.
Right. Yeah, I think there's definite pros and cons and I'm sure that it's a tough call.
Well, that's why there's MWD support and aqua neutral.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I see a matrix in this bill and when I first heard it being considered, I was very skeptical in terms of the price tag. But what I've come to read and understand about the bill, this is a proposition with costs. I had 78 billion as being the net state on level. But anyway, in terms of the 40-year window, I'm not sure why that sounded so disastrous in terms of the cost for the taxpayers, because over 4 years at 40 million in a budget that grows from 454.
Let's just keep adding to it.
No, the 78 is what it was you're adding to. The budget is the thing that gets added, the 400 million.
Well, Scott, I think you make some good points, so I'm going to move to support.
If there's no second, I will second. Okay, let's do a roll call vote.
Do we need to take public?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Do we have public comment? Any people raising their hands?
If anyone from the public would like to comment on this item, please use the raise hand feature. There are no raised hands.
Okay. Motion is first and seconded. Roll call vote.
Director Robert,
I'll abstain.
Director McMillan,
Aye.
Director Avila,
No.
Director Waters is absent. Dr. Quady?
Aye. We need at least three to carry any.
Motion. Motion does not pass.
I'll make a separate motion to remain neutral.
If we take no position, you're basically
No
neutral.
position.
Do you hear a second? I hear no second.
So we're still neutral.
Yeah.
By default.
Most formally neutral.
Okay,
Make sure the minutes accurately reflect.
thank you, Charlotte.
Thanks, Charlotte.
Okay, on to reports. Risk.
Yes, so we have made immense progress in the water resources implementation strategy process, and Ian and I are gonna share some of that with you here tonight. Ian's gonna kick us off.
All right, we'll cue this up. I'm gonna apologize. I'm at the tail end of a head cold, so if you see me sniffling and weeping, it's not for the sheer beauty of the analysis. Although I don't think you'll be disappointed. So yes, it's been a few months since our last partner workshop, and that's a few months since we last updated the board. And we had a partner workshop in the very beginning of this month. And the report out from that will be in the monthly status report next month, so you can get a little bit more detail or take a crack at it. But we're gonna go through starting, quick reminder of where this all came from. Really, the August 2023 strategic plan that your board adopted had as its vision statement this new model for resilience. And from the beginning, we really knew that this process was going to be an iterative approach, that the solution would be made up not just of several projects, but several different kinds of projects that would really bring in water at different places and over different times. And that would require programs and frameworks and institutional arrangements that didn't yet exist, and that would require the input of many people. And it wasn't going to be just one thing that was going to fix our problem. And this really has been genuinely exploratory. It's not that we didn't know anything heading into it, of course, but we have found out things I didn't think we were even anticipating. And that all happened because, as it says on this slide, that we built on a history of extensive regional collaboration. As you know, we didn't just stick with the 19 purveyors in the Calleguas service area, but we included regional partners, Las Virgenes, United, Water Conservation District, Casitas, the City of Ventura, Las Virgenes, and Santa Clarita Valley Water. I can say, when I was at Camarosa, I only had one relationship with Calleguas, right? There was one purveyor, retailer relationship part of, but having been engaged in this process with Henry and Christine over the last year and a half at this point, it really seems to me like we have really enhanced, as it says on this slide, our existing partnerships, creating new ones. It feels like we're in a really good place with a lot of our retailers on this. And as we've said to you before and was reiterated at the October 1st partner workshop, our retailers and partners are really looking to us to help solve these regional problems that are too big for them to solve on their own. So we're still in phase one. We're at the tail end of phase one, but we're still in phase one. And what comes next will be defining what we need.
And intestinal parasites.
Sorry.
It is a purgative.
That is how I feel about some of the things. Not this one.
I was swiping us.
Wow. That make the rest.
That's why we have chlorine in the water. So yeah, this phase two, what we're going to be looking at phase two was further defining not just what we need from a planning perspective, of course, but also from a political and financial perspective to make these projects come to fruition, setting up the strategy to secure that support, and then going out and making it happen. And then phase three is kind of the ongoing build the project, adapt it, manage it adaptively, and continue the funding and financing.
So, as I said a couple minutes ago, this has been a really interactive process over the course of the last year and a half. Started with interviews, 15 months maybe. They started with interviews with all of the, many of the regional partners and retailers. We had 4 partner workshops, interim work sessions and phone calls and conversations with retailers and partners, especially for projects that seemed especially viable, especially complex or interdependent. And after all that, here we are at the preferred portfolio. This doesn't mean that we've decided exactly which projects to build and we're ready to go out to bid. Note that in that rectangle at the end, options. What this means is that there's broad consensus amongst all of the participants based on the methodology I'm going to step through in a few minutes and the analysis that Christine's going to go over, that a certain constellation of projects and programs seems to be able to meet the region's needs in terms of cost and reliability versus the status quo. So, what do we mean really by the status quo? It doesn't really mean doing nothing. It means doing nothing more than what we've already planned. So some of the planned projects here in the status quo include the Las Virgenes Triunfo JPA Pure Water Project to the tune of about 1,000 acre-feet a year. There's maybe additional options to expand that if the project, as it goes into additional phases and ramps up production. The Metropolitan Drought Action Projects to reduce the impacts of another 2022 on the west side, the State Water Project dependent area. So that's some of the operational changes they're making on the east side, including options to bring water up from the central pool along the Sepulveda, and a handful of those drought action projects. Pure water is included. The interconnections we're doing in Las Virgenes and Ventura, the Crestview well and a well in the Fairview well for additional water during outages, and the pump station that we are planning to build at Lake Bard to utilize the full 10,000 acre-feet a year, or that is stored up there. Not included is the $20 billion cost for the Delta Conveyance project. But that's also not included. The additional reliability of the Delta Conveyance is also not included in the assumptions made in the status quo. So when I say that the cost and the reliability are not included, some of the analysis, that I presented a few meetings ago included the assumption that had DCP been in place in 2021 and 2022, we would not have gotten into the emergency water conservation program that led to the significant demand management measures we were in, the 1 day a week watering in 2022. So if we'd had DCP, we may never have gotten to the place where we are at the risk, but we didn't, and we are here. And going forward, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, but that clearly DCP happening or not is one of those forks in the road in the future that will determine really how much money we're going to spend of our own to develop our own local resources. So even with all of this floating off of imported water, we're still going to need conservation in some years to mitigate shortages. With all of the planned projects, we still anticipate reduced reliability, and the cost of that water is going to go up. This is based on the same assumptions that State Water Project and DWR and Metropolitan have been using, that I talked about in the last presentation on DCP, that undergird the projections for reduced reliability on the State Water Project over the next 100 years. So now for the fun stuff, methodology. Again, we didn't start from scratch, right? We started with a water supply alternative study, winners, the leading contender groups of projects, and built off of those. Some of the more attractive and clearly regional projects from our interviews and conversations with retail partners and regional partners. What we did was an analysis of how much water each of those projects would bring in, where that water would come into the system, and when that water would be available. Really, we added all that up, what that added up to in terms of reliability and resilience, and then what all that added up to in terms of dollars and cents. Not really cents, I mean, really dollars, many dollars. This is an overview, geographic overview of some of the projects that we considered. And they range from an interconnection through with LA 29 through LV, Las Virgenes on the far right. Considering participation in the South Oxnard Plain Brackish Water Treatment Plant. And that's a variation of Oxnard or United Water Conservation's EBFLOW program. Doing in lieu storage in Lake Casitas and doing aquifer storage and recovery in the Santa Paula Basin up to Santa Clara River Valley a little bit. So those are some of the borderland outside of our service area, all the way up to potentially including external groundwater banking in Kern or semi-tropic in the San Joaquin Valley. In addition to a number of projects that we would partner potentially with our retailers on inside the service area. So this is just to give you a scope, the geographic diversity of some of the projects that we've been looking at. So we looked at risk and uncertainty, not just from the kind of standard perspectives about how long it will take, how much yield might be reduced by various impacts. Is the groundwater going to be there? Is the basin going to yield what we think it's going to yield? Is it going to rain to get water in those storage basins as much as we thought? And then how much the cost might be affected by those things. But we also looked at some of these other risks and uncertainties like technical complexity, institutional complexity, how difficult is the permitting, how difficult are the partners we may have to work with, some of the frameworks we'd have to develop within the groundwater, the GMA, for instance. And then each of those projects received a risk ranking across these 4 complexity categories. And at the end, a total risk score, which we categorized into what's hopefully relatively intuitive red, yellow, and green scheme. And then what we did, we took these projects and assembled them into various portfolios and did the analysis again. We looked at these things based on which retailer partners were involved, pressure zones, that's where the water comes into the system. And then on an aggregate basis, to what extent does this impact district-wide demands, including delivery constraints? And then each of those portfolios we compared to the status quo. And we ran all these against the 96 imported water supply projections provided by Metropolitan Water District that they used in their integrated resource planning that is ongoing down there. The demand envelope, so anticipated demands over the planning period, kind of bracketed by retail urban water management plans, many of which still assume increasing demands over the planning period. The 2020 urban water management plans, those planning periods go through 2040, optionally 2045. Calleguas's urban water management plan has been flat. And then the urban water use objectives stemming from the California Conservation as a California Way of Life legislation in 2018 demonstrate decreasing demand across our service area because Oxnard is going to be able to meet these urban water use objectives, at least for the first few increments of time. But then 2030, 2035, 2040, especially the Thousand Oaks and Simi Valleys of the world are going to have a harder time meeting those targets. And so we're anticipating decreased demands. So between these 3, you gave us an envelope over time of demands. So as you're stacking supplies to meet those demands, typically start with local supplies, because they're normally cheaper than imported supplies, and those that have them, which in the future may be us as well, tend to use those first and then float off of imported demand. So as we added new supplies coming out of these portfolios, and then again, we float off of imported water. And if you look at these two these two bars, year one could be considered a normal year, and year two, maybe the second or third year drought or a reduced allocation year on the state water project where there's not quite enough water to meet imported water to float off of to meet your demands. So you're gonna have a shortage. So now under the status quo, we meet that shortage with conservation. And one of the things that we did was evaluate the frequency and magnitude of these shortages over time. And really the question then becomes, how much are you willing to live without, and how often are you willing to live without that amount of water? And really that top shortage bucket is what got us into this mess in the first place, right? Is that shortage, that bucket was too big and it happened too often and there was too much pain. So if you remember the reduced reliability and increasing cone of cost graphs that I showed a few slides ago, we did that with portfolios. So we evaluated how risks, uncertainties affect cost and reliability. So each portfolio has its own reliability and cost projection graphs. And more of that will be available to you upon request, but there was too many graphs to go through today. And then we did that for each of the portfolios. We applied a handful of evaluative criteria, and then we took the winners from each of those and created hybrid portfolios, and ran those again. So when I talk about evaluative criteria, talking about things like life cycle cost, capacity cost, the reliability, resilience, and adaptability. And adaptability was very important to us and to our regional partners involved in this. It's like, do we bring the entire project online and then we're stuck with that thing? Is it something that can be phased? Is it something that can ramp up and down depending on climatic conditions, supply conditions? So really this is, we did this again and again. So we ran these through the projects. We ran the projects through these. We ran the portfolios through these. We developed hybrid portfolios around that through here. It's kind of like gold refinement, right? You pass it through smelting, and then you do electrolysis, then you do chemical. You get closer and closer to pure product. The idea is to have a 24-karat portfolio, which is what Christine is going to describe.
All right, yeah, let's move on to the portfolio analysis. So the first thing that was done in terms of analyzing the portfolios was to group the projects into themes. So the portfolios were developed around these 6 initial themes: lowest cost, that one's pretty self-explanatory; local supply and control, which obviously maximizes local supply and control; imported water system optimization; reliability and resilience; adaptability emphasis; and then a groundwater sustainability and recycled water emphasis. And the initial analysis of these 6 portfolios taught us that, not surprisingly, investment in local water supply projects provides greater reliability at a lower long-term cost relative to the status quo, while significantly reducing the demand for imported water. Those investments also provide reliability and resilience, but because of how our distribution system is configured and our limited ability to move water from west to east, we would need pretty extensive infrastructure improvements in order to utilize all of those supplies, because most of our opportunities for water resource development are down on the plain, and most of our demand is up here in the upper zone, and we can move water very, very well from east to west, and not at all from west to east. We looked at some drought storage projects, and those increase reliability, but they have pretty high costs when you look at them over the life cycle perspective. And that's because you're purchasing imported water, you're storing it, and then you're not using it very often. So you're not distributing those capital costs over a large number of water volume. And this one at the bottom about local projects can be adaptively phased to incrementally increase reliability while moderating cost impacts. Obviously, we're talking about some potentially significant capital investments here, and your ability to do that incrementally and adapt as you move forward makes that much more cost effective and reduces rate shock. So here are those 6 portfolios. You can see that a lot of projects appear in multiple portfolios. And they are categorized in 2 categories. There's the gray ones are core projects. So those are projects that would be available at any time. And then the light blue ones are drought and outage projects. Only those are projects that would only be used during droughts or outages. So one of the initial analyses that was done, there's some animation on this, so I think, yeah. Just allow you to focus in on the 3 that scored best. It was adaptability, reliability, resilience, and lowest cost, which is interesting. So those were the top 3 out of these 6 initially themed portfolios. So from there, we went to hybrid portfolios. And what was done here's our 6 themes along the left-hand side. We looked at different permutations of putting them together. So, and came up with 4 hybrid portfolios. And the goal of this was really to take each portfolio, address each portfolio's weakness by adding projects that addressed that weakness. So, for example, with the adaptability emphasis portfolio, that was a pricier one. So we added projects that would reduce portfolio costs. Reliability and resilience, we wanted to increase the adaptability. And the lowest cost, we wanted to address reliability, resilience, and adaptability. So we ended up with these 4 hybrid portfolios. Basically took the adaptability portfolio and added some lower cost projects. Took the reliability and resilience portfolio, and we took 2 variations on that to increase the adaptability. One was on a local project basis, the other on a regional. And then this hybrid 4, the lowest cost portfolio, not surprisingly, scored very well in the cost criterion by adding west to east transmission, which would allow us to move water from west to east. That allows us to improves the reliability, resilience, and adaptability of that particular hybrid. So here you can just see what projects are included. Once again, there's a lot of overlap in the projects among the 4 hybrids, but they are not exactly the same. And when they score those hybrids, you can see this is the 3 that were the highest scoring previously: lowest cost, reliability, resilience, and adaptability. These hybrids all score better than those 3. So we've bolstered their weaknesses and increased their strengths. So what are the recommendations out of this process? Well, we have a draft preferred portfolio, which is comprised of these 6 projects, which are common to all of the hybrid portfolios. That's an expansion of the Oxnard AWPF, a desalter somewhere in the northern reach of the Calleguas Creek watershed, location TBD, a Santa Rosa Valley desalter, west to east transmission, which is the critical water movement infrastructure component of this, potentially groundwater wells in Newbury Park or elsewhere in Thousand Oaks, and a project that Camarosa has interest in that would increase their pumping capacity. And then there's some other top performing projects to include ASR in the Santa Paula Basin, Oxnard Plain program, which is a lot of different sources of water stored in the Oxnard Plain and extracted when needed. A variation on United's Ebwater project that provides potable water, an external groundwater bank. This would be an out of service area groundwater storage project, and a potential expansion of Camarosa's non-potable water system. And one of the things that we did here is you can see on the left, those are those projects in the draft preferred portfolio. For the projects that have been deemed to have a high risk, we've identified an optional project as a backup, basically. So for Newbury Park wells, that could be the Los Robles desalter. For the Oxnard Plain program, that could be storage in Lake Casitas. And for the potable variation on ebb water, that could be seawater desalination.
And just one thing to note on this is you can kind of see going through those that those risks are of different kinds, right? The Newberry Park wells of treatment, that's both a water quality risk and a water supply risk. Whereas the Oxnard Plain program is really an institutional risk. Because we can get everyone on board, get the adjudication sorted out, get a groundwater banking framework. Maybe it just makes sense to keep water in Lake Casitas instead.
Right. So one of the deliverables from this effort is no regret action. So these are the things that it makes sense to do regardless of what the future holds for us. So starting with the supply reliability improvements, it's to advance development of those highest scoring local supply projects, as well as evaluate external storage. And then for local resilience improvements, focus on local storage projects. And when you take that to kind of the next level of detail, we've divided that into three categories. One is project and partnership development, which for a project like the Oxnard AWPF expansion would involve working with a lot of other agencies in working with Oxnard, the Fox Canyon GMA, United, and others, and that takes some effort to make those arrangements work. Santa Rosa Valley Desalter and Recharge Project. This is one that Camrosa is interested in pursuing. Fewer partners, a little bit more straightforward. And this last one here in this category is to develop a wheeling and exchange framework with retail partner agencies. This is something that actually Camrosa originally brought to us, but I think there's other opportunities with some of our other retail partners as well. What Calleguas can offer is that we have an extensive distribution system and we also have demand. There's always demand. Sometimes there's more demand, sometimes there's less demand. But for some of these retailers, if they want to pursue these projects, their supply might be consistent, but their demand isn't always consistent. So if we can work out contractual arrangements that allow that water to be wheeled through our system physically or through some sort of exchange agreement, particularly if there's like a time delay component. So maybe they're providing water into our system consistently at a certain volume, but their demands aren't that high all year round. So can we balance that out in our system? So this is, I think, a really critical piece of the puzzle in making some of these creative arrangements work. And then for planning studies, I made reference to the location TBD of the desalter project. What really became clear during this process is there's been a lot of discussions of varying desalters. There's the CB Valley desalter, which the city did explore to a certain point and then put aside. Ventura County Waterworks explored the Moore Park desalter and then ultimately set that aside. We've looked at, does it make sense instead to expand the North Pleasant Valley desalter and transport that source water there? Someone needs to bring all of these pieces together and evaluate potential projects from all of the perspectives, costs, implementability, risk, and figure out which one makes the most sense. Because there is a limited pool of water, but you can access it a couple of different ways. And we really need a comprehensive study that answers the question, which way makes the most sense? And then looking at external groundwater bank alternatives, there's a number of options for these. You know, they tend to be in the Central Valley, Kern County, Palmdale area. But we would need to look at what the options are and which one might make the most sense for Calleguas.
Is that still that problem of when demand occurs between agencies? Or is that
For the desalters or the groundwater bank?
just for the groundwater bank?
Well, the groundwater bank, we would only draw on when we need it. It would be a drought supply.
So it would be acting as a reservoir.
Yes, it would be. And then focusing in on interagency coordination. This is absolutely critical to making a lot of these projects work, is to work with the GMA and other interested parties, and there are many, to develop a banking framework within the Oxnard Plain. We need to have certainty that when you put water in the ground, you are going to be able to pull it out. And then for the Santa Paula ASR, that basin has that framework. That framework exists, but we haven't been a player or a partner and a participant in that area. One of the things to clarify, the Santa Paula basin, while it is in Santa Paula, It's also in the easternmost portion of the city of Ventura, where the interconnection will connect. So geographically, that water, that basin provides a potential opportunity for us for storage. But we need to work with the parties who are part of that technical advisory committee that governs the Santa Paula Basin to see if there is an arrangement that we can reach that it meets everyone's needs. And in terms of adaptive management, we know that the one thing that's certain is uncertainty. So the recommendations today are based on what we know today. As we learn more, as situations develop, we will need to revisit and adapt. The no regret actions are really just that. Like, these are things that are going to make sense no matter what happens moving forward. But in terms of the other projects, there will be a continuous feedback loop to come back and be like, okay, well, this project made sense based on what we knew in 2024. Now we know other things, whether that's DCP is moving forward, DCP is not moving forward. Reliability is changing faster than we thought it would. The adjudication's still going on 15 years from now. Whatever the case may be, we need to be able to adapt and to adjust our timing of the projects and also swap out into optional projects if the preferred projects prove to be fatally flawed and we can't move forward with them for some reason. So in terms of next steps, we're going to be wrapping up the phase 1 risk report here in the last remaining months of 2024. And then we're going to move forward with these actions that I've highlighted today, working with the partners further developing projects, working on the desalter study, working on that wheeling and exchange framework, working on the adjudication and the groundwater banking framework. So there's a lot, we've made a lot of progress. This is a pretty important and exciting place to be, but there's still a lot of work to go and a lot more to learn. I'm going to kick it back to Ian for some additional kind of context.
One of the further developed projects, and it's right, Christine mentioned just a moment ago about big decision points in the future. You know, one of those that's happening now is that's going to affect the future status quo is really the context of what Metropolitan and our regional partners do, right? What some of the choices they're going to make are. And one of the big ones is Metropolitan's support of Delta Conveyance Project. Because Met foots the bill for 47% of the costs of the DCP. And if Metropolitan backs off of its support for DCP as currently envisioned, it's a pretty good likelihood that that project's going to have a hard time going forward. So if DCP doesn't go forward, that really impacts the cost benefit of our projects. Right? The value of local resilience of alternatives really to Metropolitan goes up. It's difficult to imagine a future in which the majority of our water, the majority of the time is not coming from Metropolitan still. Many, many things would have to change and pretty dramatically, but there is significant amount of local projects and local water that we've discovered through this process that could hedge our bets on Metropolitan. Based on how much of Met's water supply comes from the state water project, based on where we are in that system, the reliability of state water supply is really incredibly important to our long-term water supply reliability. And we can advocate for that to some extent, but we don't get to make that decision. And that variable of whether DCP progresses or not is really a major variable in our calculus here because it increases the value of alternatives, it elevates some risks, makes others more palatable. It certainly increases uncertainty, at least in the short term. But it's an even more complicated kind of a math than calculus at Metropolitan, given their negotiations to DWR over how the state can add value to Met's investments in the Delta, as well as Met's own financial constraints right now. And it's not just Met, right? DCP, State Water Project, it changes how much water may be available south of Delta for our regional partners as well. For Casitas and Ventura and United, we're talking about external groundwater banking. That water comes from the State Water Project south of Delta also. So DCP affects more, I don't want to say the entire universe of projects, but it's pretty close. And we will, as I said, that's before the board over the next couple of months, November, December. So it's something that we'll be talking about here. We're considering having a joint meeting with Las Virgenes on November 20th. So the second meeting of our second regularly scheduled board, joint board meeting with them, really to talk about DCP support. So that's really what's kind of front burner in terms of decision-making for us within the context of the risk as well. So that concludes our presentation on the risk. We're happy to answer questions.
Pretty heavy, a lot of material there.
A lot of material. Yeah, and we will make that, once that report out is available, we'll make it, circulate it to you. And yeah, I know it's a lot to digest, and Christine and I are available for questions and consultation.
Can you share those slides with us?
Yes,
Thank you.
You put a lot of thought into this, a lot of work. You can really see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great algorithm, stepping through all that.
It's been a really great process. It's been interesting and challenging and satisfying.
Yeah, I think we've learned a lot about our retailers, their systems and how water moves, but also the kinds of things that they need.
Yeah, and I'm at this moment real confused about the internal or the internal regional purveyor partnerships and how demand and supply would work if there was an exchange to be made between them versus what we would do in groundwater banking. My head's still kind of spinning on that.
Yeah.
Well, this isn't the last you'll hear of this.
Right.
So we'll be, as certain actions move forward, bringing those to the board when appropriate, for approval or updates as needed.
But it's similar to things that we talked about in the context of being a member agency of Metropolitan, right? Especially during summer 22, being a state water project dependent area. It felt like there was plenty of water for other people and there wasn't enough for us. And there are the Simi Valley and Thousand Oaks feel that way about the upper and lower zone. And so part of our job through this has been to address questions of equity, right? If we're investing in the Oxnard Plains, or as Christine said, like where all those projects are, the upper zone is like, well, are we going to be able to, how do we benefit from that? And a lot of folks really do want to see the molecule come into their part of the service area. And what I think we have made progress on is demonstrating, and we're going to have to make sure that we can demonstrate this to the governing bodies of those institutions, obviously, as well, that additional water in the lower zone does benefit folks in the upper zone. I don't think that that's intuitive to a lot of people, and I think we're making progress, and we're starting to understand what different governing bodies need to understand that better.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you so much.
I think it's interesting to see because, this process is a long process, takes a lot of analysis and information gathering. And it's interesting to see that I think we benefit from the process regardless of the outcome. It allows us to know more of the pieces and to be a little more nimble. And so I've really appreciated kind of being brought along on that.
I agree.
Thank you. Thank you very much. GM's report.
I'm going to keep this short because I know we've still got 2 short closed sessions tonight. One meeting I just want to mention, Charlotte, Fernando, Jennifer and I spent a really interesting half a day out at Amgen a couple weeks ago, meeting with some of their key environmental staff. They have some pretty ambitious goals for reducing their water use at their Thousand Oaks site. And some of those opportunities would generate brine that could be discharged into the S&P. So we talked about those possibilities, also got to see a tour of the facility, which was super cool. So those conversations are ongoing, but I think it was a really great initial meeting and a potential partnership. And they also highlighted that whole part of Thousand Oaks, that Newbury Park area is a biotech hub. And so they're not the only ones who treat potable water to a higher standard for their needs. And so there may be some other opportunities there with other companies in the vicinity. I also spent Thursday and Friday out in Pomona with my fellow Metropolitan member agency GMs on a 2-day retreat, starting the business model process. Henry joined me remotely. We were allowed one person in the room and, well, then I apparently an unlimited number of people online. But it was a challenging couple of days. We've got some really thorny issues to disentangle. But we did make some good progress in terms of identifying the challenges that we're facing, and this process will be ongoing. Basically, it is being led by an outside facilitator, which I think is the only way one can navigate a process this complex and this fraught. So there'll be a series of in-person meetings over the next couple of months where we tackle issues, and there will be at least one other two-day retreat with the goal of bringing a proposal to the committee, the parent committee, and which is the camp committee in March, late March. Which is ambitious, I will say, for what we're tackling, but we did make some progress, but still a lot of hard work ahead. So that's my update.
I just have one question on the Amgen stuff and any of the others is that with those, all of those cases, are they just taking potable water and, you know, purifying it, and then that's the brine they get rid of?
Yeah.
It's nothing to do with their anything else, right?
That is what we would allow them to put in the SMP. We did have some discussions about what we do and don't allow in the SMP under the governing ordinance, which is ordinance 19. So ordinance 19 specifies that what you can discharge into the SMP is potable water, groundwater, tertiary treated recycle, or brine from the membrane treatment of any of the above. So that's what we're limited to. As well as meeting, of course, the water quality standards in our alcohol permit.
Right. I just didn't want to trigger any 40 CFR 403 activity. Okay, very good. Okay, thank you. On the way to September 2024 water use and sales.
Yes, tonight we have Susan Taylor, our accounting supervisor, standing in for Dan Smith.
Dan was sick today and didn't want to get you all sick as well.
That's really going around.
Our thanks.
Yeah,
Some of us.
my personal thanks.
We didn't think you could have a meeting without me and Ian, both of whom have colds.
Screen is not sharing. Let me get that back in. Here it goes. So this is a pretty simple. I don't have this many options at home. It's kind of fun. I think. Yeah, I'm just trying to get this to come down so I can hit the share button.
Sure.
It's already shared, so I'm gonna have to share this, right?
No, just click on this and see if you can do that to the screen. Yep. There you go.
Thank you. You're welcome. Okay, so we're gonna start with potable water sales. I'm gonna keep it pretty brief. We only have a few months into the year. And in September, we sold more water than we have in the last 3 years, 7,712 square feet above budget, which is also notable. And if we look at the same period, the last 3 years, we're doing better than we have the last 2. So this is sales versus what we budgeted. The red line is the budget, blue line is the sales. And you can see each month of the fiscal year so far, we've been over budget.
And this is the good kind of over budget.
This is the good kind. This is the budget you want to be over on. Exactly. Next one is our metropolitan reconciliation. It shows our total water sales plus our total water purchased, total storage, which is usually injected into Lake Bard for evaporation to make up for that. There's always a reconciliation adjustment, and that has to do with when we read our meters, when Matt reads their meters. The CRC and the RTS are fixed. LRP funds come from Camrosa. Conservation program costs are low this month, and no turf replacement program monies. SMP brine discharge. For me, historically, I've never seen it above budget. So this is pretty remarkable. And the month to month, September to what was budgeted is almost identical, as close as I've ever seen it. So that's kind of fun. As fun as finance can be. Power generation sales, so this is for August, because we're always 2 months behind on this one. We have a good start on the year. We're above budget. With power generation, anything can happen over the next 9 months, 10 months, but for now, it looks really good. I like these reports when it's not bad news. So our revenues, potable water sales, were up to 31%, slightly over total budget. Recycled water sales look really good, 50% of total budget. Good news, but on the other hand, it's a very small part of our revenues, very small part of what we look at as far as water sales go. Cash and investments, another good month. We're up 2.2 million. You'll notice that September cash balance is at almost $11 million. So we have moved since this report, 8.5 million into unrestricted investments so that we can make some interest on that. And reason for that much money in revenues is because it's that time of year where our water sales are far exceeding what we're paying Metropolitan. And it kind of reverses at the beginning of the year with that 2-month lag with Met versus a 1 month with our purveyors. And if anybody has any questions, I would be more than happy to try and answer them.
Any questions for Sue?
Seems like a good report to stand in for Dan.
Yeah, I like it. All right, then. Well, I will let you get back to your meeting. Thank you.
That was part of the meeting, Sue. That's
I feel like I'm interrupting.
Very good. General counsel report.
I'm looking to report 2 items on closed session tonight.
And committee meeting report. Sponsorship
We
committee.
do have a sponsorship committee to report.
Yes, we did review AWA sponsorship and decided to approve, I believe it was 14,600 and change. And then we added a little bit more on some other
Yeah.
outside.
We approved AWA's full request. They'd asked for additional sponsorship for the operator award and for sponsoring students to attend the symposium.
Right, and it was only, I believe, $400 for that second one, and the other one was minimal as well. So we decided to go ahead and recommend, we approve or recommend approval, sorry.
The committee approved.
The committee approved the recommendation.
As well as certified the Association of Water Agencies of Ventura County as an organization that we can sponsor.
Yes.
So is that lead thing status on the budget?
Yeah, we
already had that on the budget.
We didn't have all of the sponsorship in the budget, but Dan assured us that we could handle the slight increase because it was a very small increase beyond what had already been budgeted.
I did ask Dan that during the meeting and he said that it was such a small amount that the budget could handle.
Yep.
Okay, board member reports, Region 8. I actually have nothing to report, just that the conference is coming up 12/3 through 5. Aqua Joint Powers, again, that's leads the conference activity in 12/2 and 3. Just want to mention that the JPIA Summit has new educational sessions and they seem to be headed as Ask JPI Anything, Anatomy of a Claim, and Cyber Chronicles. So those are part of the new and coming things. And probably less relevant workers' comp meeting in June 25th of 2025. Okay, on to the Association of Water Agencies, Ventura County.
Yeah, so this month we had the executive committee on the 10th. And throughout the meeting, basically what we covered was they are starting a new harassment policy and a code of conduct policy. It's formed were done over by Greg Patterson, council that's on the board of AWA. And those drafts should be coming out soon for AWA members.
Harassment prevention. policy.
It's how to hurt.
Correct.
Okay.
How it works.
An important
It's always
distinction.
less.
Yeah. And on the fifteenth, there was AWA Waterwise, which was some great discussion on the Fillmore San Paulo Basin, as well as updates by all the member agencies.
Very good. Fox Hill, groundwater management agency,
Nothing to report.
Metropolitan Water District.
Yes, on October 3rd, I attended the Northern Caucus via Zoom. October 6th to the 8th, I attended MWD's committee and board meetings. On the 9th, I participated in a tour, it says of DBL, but it was actually their apprentice program. That is at DBL. And then on October the 14th, I chaired the ad hoc committee on Bay Delta.
Okay. Ventura County LAFCO.
That we have not had a meeting since the last one.
Okay. Ventura County Regional Energy Alliance, next meeting is November 21. And today they had a Central Coast Sustainability Summit, which I did not attend. Ventura County Special District Association.
I was not in the country for that meeting. Were you in attendance?
Yes, I was there. Trying to remember who gave us an update.
I was just trying to look it up.
Oh, actually, it was from CSDA. He talked about the whole program that they have, all the benefits that's available to members. And it really was a very comprehensive presentation that he gave, and they really are doing a great job of bringing more and more benefits to the organization. So it was really good. And also they are starting their look for leaders for the upcoming year. So far, no one has stepped up yet. So it's going to be a challenge. I proposed moving the meeting to a lunch as opposed to the evening, but the membership can't vote on it until the new leadership comes in.
Oh,
So
chicken and egg.
get chicken and egg.
Sounds like that's one way to kick it in.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, get going on your municipal meetings.
Oh, yes, thank you. October 3rd, I attended the CSDA's membership committee by Zoom. October the 5th, I attended the Employee Appreciation Barbecue. On October 9th, I attended the sponsorship committee. October 10th, I attended CoLab's annual meeting. October the 11th, I completed cyber training on malware. Love that, Dee Dee. And then on October 15th, I attended Aqua's Water Issues Committee via Zoom.
Okay, Director Robert.
Back to that screen. On the 7th, I viewed Metropolitan's One Water Stewardship. On the 8th, Metropolitan's Ethics, Organizational and Personnel Subcommittee. And on the 15th, AWA Water Issues. And tonight's board meeting.
Director O'Leary.
On the 7th, Metropolitan's One Water Stewardship Committee. On the 8th, Metropolitan Water District's board meeting. On the 10th, AWA Exec Committee, and tonight's board meeting.
Very good. Okay, and then I attended yesterday the Aqua Region 10. Was it a regional session which highlighted PFAS with Paul Schoenberger? Paul Papers. And I talked a lot too, so Paul Rochelle.
Oh, Paul Rochelle, that makes more sense. He's a water quality guy.
And then we also had a demonstration from the water district at their hydrant.
Heli
hydrant. And did emphasize that you should you can still look around for that particular setup, but anyway, heli hydrant was they had a helicopter come by and he drank 3 times, dumped twice in front of us, and then he missed both times. So, and went on to somewhere else. So, but it was great to watch. And then it still kind of struck me as that here's a Blackhawk or a converted Blackhawk to they call it a Firehawk, and they still have to eyeball it to get it in the tank. I just thought, wow. And so they have different lights, coming to highlight the tank, and now those lights have to be night vision compatible.
Oh.
Right. So I thought that was pretty fascinating. And tonight's board meeting.
I did have one that I was to mention. I was happy to see that Metropolitan re-elected Don Ortega as their board chair. Good.
And then I'll make a correction because I missed the last board meeting on the 2nd, so I have to go back to the 18th. On the September 19th, I attended AWA 29th annual reception, 24th Metropolitan Subcommittee on Pure Water, and the 25th Metropolitan Subcommittee on Long-Term Regional Planning.
Very good.
Thanks.
Any discussion on upcoming meetings?
Just 2 things that I could highlight. One is that AWA WaterWise will not be tomorrow. They have rescheduled it to next Thursday, the 24th. And that's because the United Water Conservation District Water Sustainability Summit is tomorrow. And they didn't want to do it on the same day. So that'll be next Thursday, not tomorrow. And I did want to point out, Ian mentioned this as part of the RIST, but we will be having a joint board meeting with Las Virgenes on November 20th, focusing on DCP. So that'll be here.
Is that the same day as our purveyor meeting,
No.
WaterWise?
Oh, WaterWise, yes.
Yeah.
WaterWise is the same day as the purveyor meeting. That's correct.
So 8 AM there, 10 AM here.
Correct.
Good. Water supply conditions report. Wrap up of 2023-24.
Yeah, reports in the packet. We can answer questions if there are any.
Okay, well, then I guess we'll roll into a closed session.
We have 2 closed sessions. We'll do the first one. Jennifer will be joining us, and then Wes will grab you for the second.
So we will adjourn the open.
Zoom chairs. Hi, chairs.
Okay, so we shall reconvene the open session. And
As to items 9A and B, the board received an update and no action was taken.
thank you very much, all.